What if everything you truly want lies just outside your comfort zone, waiting for you to reach past your silent fears? Many battles for mental health are fought in shadows we refuse to enter, leaving us trapped by invisible barriers. This book is your invitation to step boldly into discomfort, decode your limits, and finally reclaim your power. The path to lasting success and healing is paved with uncertainty, but only those willing to venture into the unknown will discover the fullness of life. Will you dare to stretch? Get uncomfortable. Why true success comes from stretching yourself. Written and published by Mindset Liberation. Chapter 1. Embrace the initial discomfort. Everywhere you look, a silent epidemic weaves through the lives of millions, the pervasive urge to chase comfort and avoid discomfort at any cost. This deeply ingrained reaction shapes much of modern existence, from the daily rituals that soothe us to the avoidance strategies we wield against anything uncertain or unsettling. According to the World Health Organization, more than 264 million people worldwide suffer from anxiety disorders, and many of these cases are fueled by an ongoing quest to fend off discomfort rather than confront it. The urge to retreat is rarely questioned, but its effects are quietly corrosive, seeping into how individuals see themselves and making profound change seem almost impossible. If you have ever found yourself frozen at the prospect of a difficult conversation, sidestepping a promising but risky opportunity, or arranging your life around avoiding the sting of rejection or failure, you are not alone. In reality, these carefully constructed habits of avoidance come at a devastating cost to mental health. Experts in cognitive behavioral therapy suggest that perceived threats, even when irrational, trigger survival instincts meant to protect us from harm. Over time, the mind's warnings against discomfort become louder, creating an invisible fence that limits success, relationships, and personal fulfillment. The safe retreat of comfort is seductive because it feels so natural, so justified, while entering discomfort feels counterintuitive, even dangerous. Yet beneath this familiar urge to flee lies another, rarely articulated truth. The path that seems safest is often the very thing causing silent suffering. Research published in the Journal of Anxiety Disorders highlights the dangers of chronic avoidance strategies. These coping mechanisms, rather than protecting us, amplify anxiety, compound depression, and decrease emotional resilience. People who consistently escape what feels hard may find their world growing smaller, their options narrowing as avoidance becomes a way of life. Everyday routines once intended as protection quietly morph into cages. Take an honest look at your routine. How often do you default to what soothes rather than what strengthens? In workplaces around the world, talented individuals hide behind their desks, fearful of voicing ideas that might be controversial or stepping into roles that might stretch their capacities. In relationships, difficult but necessary conversations are postponed indefinitely, growing into invisible divides. Very often, those determined to minimize discomfort report rising frustration, a hollow sense of wasted potential, and steadily eroding confidence. The cost of comfort is rarely spoken aloud, yet it carves wounds that can last for years. The roots of this response lie in both biology and culture. Human evolution prized safety and self-preservation, hardwiring the brain to avoid danger and seek ease. In more recent history, society has elevated comfort into a kind of moral good, championing convenience while quietly neglecting the necessary friction of growth. This leaves many people torn between primal instincts and a quieter voice, urging them to lean into the uncomfortable rather than escape it. The hidden truth, the one so few dare to face, is that discomfort is not the enemy. Instead, it may be the very catalyst necessary for escaping the invisible prisons so many inhabit. In embracing the initial discomfort, you begin the process of genuine transformation. The relentless drive to avoid discomfort is not a trivial quirk, but a profoundly influential force, silently shaping the architecture of our emotions, decision-making, relationships, and sense of self. When discomfort is habitually evaded, sometimes so instinctively that it barely registers, emotional resilience withers and the spectrum of what feels manageable contracts. Psychologically, the brain interprets every act of escape as a reassurance that discomfort is dangerous, reinforcing anxiety every time it is sidestepped. Studies from Stanford University's Department of Psychology reveal that repeated avoidance heightens sensitivity to distressing situations, leaving individuals emotionally brittle and more reactive to even minor stressors. Emotions that could be processed and integrated fester just beneath the surface, emerging not as manageable discomfort but as simmering anxiety or numbing detachment. This emotional fragility reveals itself most starkly in decision-making. Faced with choices, those led by the urge for comfort become less willing to confront even moderate risk. Their choices bend toward what is familiar and risk-free, regardless of where their passions or ambitions might draw them. Subtle at first, this habit compounds over years until life itself feels curated to avoid unpleasantness, and by extension, growth. Consider the story of James, a mid-level manager whose fear of conflict meant constantly agreeing to unreasonable workloads rather than risking a conversation with his boss. Outwardly competent, he grew inwardly resentful and anxious, his indecision paralyzing both his professional progress and his willingness to invest in meaningful personal relationships. Research in behavioral economics supports these personal accounts, showing that chronic avoidance eliminates opportunities to learn from regret, disappointment, and even failure, all of which are essential for maturing through life's uncertainties. Relationships, perhaps more than any other area, bear the heavy brunt of this dynamic. Authentic connection demands the willingness to engage with vulnerability and emotional risk. When people invest heavily in comfort and the avoidance of discomfort, honesty and transparency are among the first casualties. Case studies reported in the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy mirror the life of Emma, who struggled with depressive symptoms after years of swallowing grievances and never voicing her hopes, disappointments, or fears to her partner. What seemed on the surface like keeping the peace was actually a slow erosion of connection, intimacy, and trust. The listing of unspoken needs and unresolved pain distorted Emma's view of herself, fueling shame and a feeling of unworthiness that only compounded her struggles with mental health. The more she avoided discomfort, the dimmer her sense of self became, until she felt nearly invisible. At the core of all these patterns lies a toxic effect on self-esteem. As individuals repeatedly pass up the chance to confront discomfort, they unwittingly chip away at their own sense of agency. Each avoided challenge is unconsciously filed under "too hard for me" or "not worth the trouble," accumulating until the very foundations of self-worth crack. The truth, validated by cognitive behavioral experts, is that confidence only develops through direct engagement with discomfort, not through its avoidance. Nevertheless, people continue to slip into the cycle, misled by beliefs that comfort will bring happiness, that serenity and challenge cannot coexist. The widespread massaging of discomfort as an enemy blinds many to its true nature, a necessary crucible for growth. Most people remain unaware of how pervasive and subtle these patterns are in their lives. As we move forward, it becomes essential to recognize the hidden warning signs of chronic avoidance. Those silent markers that, left unchecked, deepen the cycle and delay genuine healing. The next part of this chapter will reveal precisely those warning signs most people ignore. When the avoidance of discomfort becomes habitual, it doesn't always shout its presence. Instead, it seeps quietly into daily routines and relationships, disguising itself as sensible caution or harmless preferences. The manifestations often masquerade as logical choices, declining an invitation to a social event because of vague unease, shying away from a new project at work under the pretense of being too busy, or endlessly delaying decisions with the hope that uncomfortable uncertainties will resolve themselves. These scenarios are not isolated incidents, but threads in a much larger fabric of lived experience. Imagine Michael, who avoids answering calls from his friends, convinced he is protecting his energy, but slowly realizes his world is shrinking and his connections are eroding. Or consider Priya, who eagerly takes on others' burdens but never voices her needs, rationalizing that self-sacrifice is virtuous, even as her anxiety and resentment build quietly in the shadows of her mind. Such manifestations rarely appear dramatic at first. Over time, however, the cumulative weight of these tendencies begins to shape how people navigate the world. A high-achieving student like Lena may default to well-tread routines and shy away from advanced classes, convinced that the fear of potential failure matters more than the satisfaction of growth. Her academic path narrows, and her self-confidence dwindles, not because she lacks ability, but because she consistently dodges the short-lived sting of challenge. Across the spectrum, small hesitations add up. Silently declining a meetup out of fear of awkwardness turns into months of isolation, and persistent fear of criticism slowly tempers honest self-expression at home or work. Each choice made in quiet, solitary moments gradually accumulates into a pronounced pattern of avoidance. Recognizing these patterns is a profound and often jarring awakening. It demands a level of self-observation that many rarely practice amid life's demanding pace. The wonder is in finally noticing how each foregone risk, each retreat from discomfort, becomes a brick in the wall separating you from possibility. Many people, perhaps even now, read these cases and feel an uncomfortable pang, the echo of similar moments in their own lives. Yet within that discomfort lies tremendous opportunity. To identify and name the ways avoidance operates is to expose it to the cleansing light of awareness. As neuroscience research has shown, being able to step outside of yourself, observe these patterns impartially, and label them is an essential precursor to change. Awareness turns the unknown into the known. It is the first decisive step toward healing and renewal. Understanding how the reluctance to face discomfort infiltrates day-to-day living, emotional wellness, and opportunity is not a cause for shame but a gateway to transformation. Each small act of recognition loosens the grip of self-imposed limits and begins the slow, steady process of dismantling the cage. Healing starts not with grand gestures, but with honest acknowledgement of where you are and what avoidance costs you. As you move forward, preparing to challenge the deeply familiar patterns that have quietly defined your world, you become more open to meaningful growth. The journey does not end here. The next chapter will guide you in challenging your safe patterns, exploring specific tools and strategies to disrupt the routines that keep you stuck, and illuminating the first pathways to real change. Every step of this process matters, and your willingness to uncover hidden truths is the single most valuable asset on your journey. To continue strengthening your understanding and practicing these insights, remember that Mindset Liberation offers not just this book, but a thriving community. Subscribe for deeper conversations, reflect on what this chapter sparked in you, and share your experiences as you take your first bold steps toward healing. Recognizing the problem is where recovery begins, and only then can genuine progress take root. Next, discover how to unmask and challenge the safe patterns that stand between you and your greatest potential. Chapter 2. Challenge your safe patterns. You hold the extraordinary ability to rewrite the story of your own comfort, and now is the moment to seize that potential. The first real solution lies in daring to challenge the safe patterns that have quietly woven themselves into your daily habits. These familiar patterns promise shelter, but they often serve as subtle barriers to new experiences, meaningful connection, and lasting growth. Humans are creatures of habit, and it is entirely natural for the brain to form efficient routines that require less energy and lower perceived risk. Neuroscientists have established that nearly 40% of daily actions occur as habits, many of which sculpt the shape of our lives while escaping conscious notice. The patterns you create may be well-intentioned, developed as a reaction to past stress, pain, or even earlier chapters of anxiety, but they can rapidly become obsolete. With time, these routines calcify, locking you into repetitive cycles that may have served you once, but now quietly suffocate your progress. Most people find themselves repeating the very same morning rituals, choosing the same seats in meetings, and reaching for the same sources of comfort whenever unease arises. This observable predictability doesn't just bring structure and safety, it quietly breeds stagnation and chips away at confidence in facing the unknown. According to research from Duke University, individuals embedded in rigid patterns are far less likely to pursue novel experiences or expose themselves to situations that might challenge their ingrained worldview. The effect isn't limited to harmless routines. Over-reliance on safe patterns can translate directly into habits of self-doubt, social withdrawal, and unfulfilled ambition, quietly dulling life's vibrant possibilities. The origins of these behaviors run deep, often grounded in early messages about safety and belonging. Perhaps you watched a parent sidestep difficulty, or your own formative years were marked by moments when comfort was a reward and challenge carried the risk of embarrassment. These early lessons etch themselves into the subconscious, waiting for the first sign of discomfort to rise up as guides. Yet, no matter how entrenched these patterns become, change remains accessible. Real-life stories abound of people who found the courage to do just one thing differently, saying yes to a speaking opportunity at work, despite shaking nerves, or deliberately choosing to break their after-work routine to try a new activity with friends. These brave disruptions are not rare. They are the invisible inflection points that mark the beginning of transformation for so many. Studies published in the Journal of Positive Psychology consistently show that intentional acts, minor as they may seem, started by challenging existing patterns, often lead to lasting confidence and greater emotional well-being. Every time you act outside your habitual comfort zone, you prove to your mind that you are not defined by what you have always done. You open a window to new capabilities and surprising sources of strength. Challenging your safe patterns is not about discarding all routine or feeling perpetually uneasy. It's about gently questioning which practices build you up and which quietly shrink you. This chapter is your invitation to begin that inquiry, to step forward with a willingness to see your familiar world a little differently. The science of behavior change doesn't just describe this hope. It stands as evidence that a more energetic, autonomous, and fulfilling life begins with a single choice to disrupt what feels automatic. For the first time, you will discover that growth is always possible the moment you challenge your safe patterns and trust your capacity for renewal. Challenging safe patterns is so powerful because it directly engages the brain's remarkable ability to adapt and rewire itself in response to new experiences. Neuroscientific research into neuroplasticity has illuminated how breaking from ingrained routines activates new neural pathways, boosting resilience, confidence, and emotional flexibility. When you deliberately step outside your comfort zone, even in small, manageable ways, you disrupt the automatic, reflexive habits that often perpetuate anxiety and self-limiting beliefs. This act is not symbolic. It triggers biological and psychological changes that catalyze progress at a deep level. Scientists at University College London have discovered that consistent, intentional modification of daily behaviors leads to measurable increases in cognitive flexibility, making individuals more capable of adjusting to stress, recovering from setbacks, and approaching problems with curiosity rather than dread. It is as though each act of challenging a familiar habit is a declaration that you refuse to be held captive by old fears, training your mind to expect growth, not retreat, in the face of the unfamiliar. The urgency of adopting this approach is underscored in virtually every therapeutic breakthrough for anxiety, depression, and chronic self-doubt. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most extensively studied treatments for mental health challenges, teaches that change is not dependent on an overwhelming overhaul, but on incremental modifications to thought and behavior patterns. By consciously breaking cycles of avoidance through micro-experiments, individuals start to erode long-standing patterns of negative thinking. This is not simply a poetic notion, but a scientifically validated intervention. Every step outside of rigid patterns acts as evidence that the catastrophe we fear rarely materializes. In fact, the world grows wider and more accommodating the more we dare to experiment. Consider the experience of Deshaun, a software developer who suffered silently with social anxiety for most of his adult life. His days were meticulously organized to avoid unexpected interactions, and he followed a sensory ritual before every meeting to keep intrusive thoughts at bay. Over time, his world became so small that even minor changes, like a meeting running late, filled him with dread. When Deshaun reluctantly began therapy, his psychologist encouraged him not to overhaul his world overnight, but to gently test its boundaries. The first challenge was seemingly trivial: arriving at work and intentionally greeting one colleague he normally did not interact with. The result was a racing heart and beads of sweat, but notably, nothing catastrophic. Over weeks, these micro-changes widened to more meaningful interactions, proposing a suggestion in a team meeting, eating lunch in the break room rather than at his desk. Each act of challenging his safe patterns was followed by careful reflection and gentle acknowledgement of his progress, deepening his conviction that he was far more capable than the confines of his routine had suggested. The effectiveness of this technique lies in its cumulative truths. The brain learns through repetition, and after enough evidence that discomfort does not equate to disaster, its fear response fades. Courage grows not from the absence of anxiety, but from the regular embrace of mild unease. Safe patterns first seem to promise comfort, but ultimately anchor us in a shallow state of being. Disrupting them, even in the smallest ways, is both a signal and a rehearsal for a life that aspires to more. The method is transformative because it works in concert with our psychology and biology, removing the illusion of helplessness and showing, with undeniable clarity, that new horizons await each brave step forward. You are about to embark on practical steps that can transform your relationship to comfort and unlock energy you never imagined you possessed. The process begins simply. Choose one routine, habit, or decision flow that usually feels automatic and predictable in your daily life. This could be as subtle as the route you drive to work, the time of day you eat lunch, or the way you habitually avoid certain social interactions. Pause for a moment and reflect, identifying the area where you most clearly feel stuck or restless. Once this is clear in your mind, commit to making one small, manageable change in that space. Alter your route, change your lunch spot, or greet someone new. Boldness does not require grand scale. It only requires the courage to do what's just beyond your norm. The key to this method is mindful experimentation, not perfection or instant results. Each time you act outside your usual pattern, pause and notice the physical and emotional reactions you experience. You may feel uncertain, awkward, or even anxious. These emotions are evidence that you're engaging in meaningful growth rather than empty routine. Breathe deeply and affirm to yourself that this discomfort is a true companion on your journey and not a sign that you are failing. Jot down your emotions, surprises, and victories, however small, at the end of the day. Over just 1 week of this mindful tracking, you will start to notice shifts not only in behavior, but in your own sense of agency and confidence. The more you document and acknowledge your small wins, the more visible your progress becomes. At the heart of implementing this practice is a mindset of curiosity and willingness. Frame each change as an experiment, not an obligation or test. Approach discomfort with the question, what might I discover about myself or my world if I try this? Instead of focusing on anticipated outcomes or perfection, direct your attention to learning. Sometimes a new pattern will immediately reveal value. Other times you might stumble or want to return to old comforts. That is part of growth. Each stretch creates a new sense of possibility, and resilience increases every time you explore uncharted routines. Remember, step-by-step change is both practical and powerful because it builds self-esteem and success from experience you can immediately control. If at any point this process feels daunting, seek support. Share your intentions with a friend or join a community determined to break free of stagnant routines. Celebrate progress out loud, allowing small wins to open the door to bigger challenges later on. The combination of action and reflection quickly proves that transformation does not wait on some distant motivation or ideal set of circumstances. You can start now, and momentum builds much faster than you might believe. As your newly challenged patterns become sources of growth, new goals that once felt out of reach start to seem inviting and possible. As you look toward your next chapter, you will discover how action itself becomes the fuel to confront your deepest fears head-on, making visible progress not by thinking, but by doing. Get ready to transform tension into triumph as you learn how to confront fear with real action. For even deeper support and ongoing encouragement, make sure to engage with Mindset Liberation. Subscribe, reflect in the comments about your progress, and add your voice to this movement for positive change. The adventure continues with your willingness to keep stepping into new territory, even one small act at a time. Chapter 3. Confront fear with action. Fear loses its hold the moment you dare to move forward. The antidote to the paralyzing grip of fear is not endless preparation or overthinking, but immediate, deliberate action. While it is natural to believe we need to feel brave before we take a step, countless psychological studies confirm the opposite. Momentum creates courage, not the other way around. According to clinical psychologist Dr. Susan David, founder of the Harvard McLean Institute of Coaching, courage is not the absence of fear, but taking action in its presence. The power to shift overwhelming anxiety and hesitation into progress begins with that first imperfect step. What makes this approach not only possible but effective for anyone is its basis in both science and the lived experiences of individuals who have reclaimed their power through action, often against deeply rooted fears. Inside our minds, fear is a survival mechanism meant to protect us from danger, but the brain can easily confuse imagined threats with genuine risk. Studies from the National Institute of Mental Health have revealed that the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, reacts in much the same way to public speaking as it does to oncoming physical threats. The biological urge to avoid uncomfortable action is, in many ways, unavoidable. But here lies the liberating truth. Repeated exposure to the things we fear, performed in manageable doses, is scientifically proven to lower distress. Each act of courage literally retrains the brain to reinterpret fear signals, as demonstrated by decades of research on exposure therapy used to treat anxiety disorders. The principle is simple and powerful. By stepping into what scares us, even in small increments, we chip away at the hold fear has on body and soul. These principles come to life in real stories from everyday people pushing past doubt and unease. Take Maya, for example, a young professional whose terror of leading meetings nearly cost her a key promotion. She did not conquer her fear by waiting for it to disappear. Instead, she volunteered to run a short section of a team meeting. Her cheeks burned, her voice shook, and her heart thudded wildly, but the world did not collapse around her. In the aftermath, exhilaration replaced anxiety, and Maya discovered she possessed more resilience and authority than she had believed possible. With each subsequent act, signing up for a workshop, contributing to larger meetings, her sense of capability grew, building a record of victories that rewrote her narrative about fear and self-worth. Thousands of people overcome barriers just like Maya did, using action as a lever to transform doubt into possibility. The hopeful message woven through their stories and reinforced by research is this: you do not need to let fear dictate the size of your world or the reach of your dreams. When you turn toward your discomfort, momentum ignites and confidence blooms. This approach belongs to you, no matter your past experiences or current struggles. Action is available now. Even the smallest step breaks the illusion that fear is unchangeable. Every act in the direction of your fear releases new potential within you, setting the stage for ongoing growth and renewed hope. The effectiveness of confronting fear with action is rooted in the biological and psychological mechanisms that determine how the human brain interprets and ultimately responds to threat. On a scientific level, the process is known as systematic desensitization, a core strategy within exposure therapy, which is the gold standard when treating anxiety, phobias, and post-traumatic stress disorder. When we approach our fears directly, rather than avoiding or endlessly ruminating on them, we dismantle the brain's fear signals through repeated, safe engagement. This has measurable effects on both brain function and emotional well-being. Neurologists at Stanford University have demonstrated through brain imaging that with each act of confronting what scares us, the amygdala's alarm lessens, reinforcing a calm, rational response and paving the way for renewed self-control. The cycle of fear, fueled by avoidance and magnification, is broken each time decisive, values-oriented action is chosen over hesitation and retreat. Consider the experience of Adam, a man whose deep-seated fear of public places made everyday errands intolerable. Each attempt to leave his apartment was met with a flood of anxiety, dizziness, and paralyzing self-consciousness, keeping his world painfully small. With the help of a cognitive behavioral specialist, Adam began a deliberate process of graduated exposure, taking his first step by simply standing at his front door for a few minutes daily. even if his hands trembled. The practice built from these humble beginnings to short walks in his building's hallway, then to visits to a nearby coffee shop, and eventually to bustling grocery stores. Every instance of confronting his fear through purposeful action was met with immediate discomfort. But with time, the sensations became less intense. Adam's brain slowly learned that the anticipated catastrophe never materialized, diminishing the sense of danger and restoring his faith in his own ability to cope. This method is crucially distinct from wishful thinking or forced positive affirmations. Instead, it changes the machinery of fear where it lives, in memory and neural connections. Research consistently shows that passive rumination about what could go wrong only entrenches fear, gives it authority, and leaves us trapped in anticipation. It is action, authentic, tangible, and directed at the very thing avoided, that brings about true transformation. Action alone demonstrates to both the mind and body that anxiety can be tolerated, survived, and eventually mastered. The stakes go beyond mere comfort, for each act has a compounding effect, increasing the ability to take on even greater challenges in the future. The urgent need for this knowledge cannot be overstated. Without deliberate action, fears multiply and limit potential. But when met head-on, they become stepping stones to a larger, richer life. In a culture saturated with promises of instant relief or easy fixes, the hard truth and rewarding promise is that only intentional exposure breaks the circuitry of chronic fear. Each person who has walked this path and persisted through discomfort stands as living proof that new ways of being are available to anyone willing to act. The science is not only convincing, it is compassionate and liberating. You already possess everything you need to begin. As real individuals like Adam have found, and as researchers continue to confirm, the path to freedom from limiting fears begins the instant you move boldly through them, one courageous action at a time. You are now ready to move from intention to action, turning fear into a challenge that prompts your best self rather than holds you in place. Begin by identifying a fear that feels like it's standing between you and the life you truly want. This does not need to be the largest or scariest fear. Choose something concrete and specific, such as speaking up at work, attending a new social group, or tackling an unfamiliar task. On a notepad, write the exact situation you tend to avoid and acknowledge the discomfort it brings without judgment. This first act of recognition makes the invisible visible. Now, design your first small action, making it as manageable as possible. For example, if public speaking sparks anxiety, start by expressing a short opinion in a small meeting rather than addressing a crowd. If new places are intimidating, visit the location outside of peak hours or simply step through the doorway without any requirements beyond being present. When you practice this strategy, pay close attention to your body's signals before, during, and after you act. Notice faster breathing, tense muscles, or racing thoughts, and respond by focusing on steady, conscious breaths to center yourself. Each step should be carefully observed, but not overanalyzed. After you complete the action, reflect immediately on what actually happened compared to what you feared would occur. 9 times out of 10, reality is gentler than anticipated. Write down this evidence, track your reactions, and celebrate every instance that did not meet your worst expectations. These small wins begin to accumulate, proving to your mind that fearful predictions lose power with reality-based testing. Next, gradually increase your engagement with your fear. Once you've succeeded in a minor step, consider adding a touch more complexity. Maybe lengthening your comment at the next meeting, making conversation with a complete stranger, or taking on a slightly more demanding responsibility at work. Approach each new opportunity with compassionate persistence, not pressure. Remind yourself that progress exists on a spectrum. Courage is built through consistency, not through heroic leaps. Each time you face your fear and act, you loosen its grip that little bit more. If a particular experience feels overwhelming, it's okay to pause, regroup, and try again with an even smaller action. The goal is not perfection, but steady movement that honors both your current abilities and future desires. To reinforce your successes, share them with someone supportive or record a personal victory log. This makes growth real, tangible, and self-sustaining. The more frequently you revisit previous accomplishments, the stronger your trust in your own resourcefulness becomes. Remember that every positive action, no matter how modest, is an act of self-respect that deserves recognition. Through this approach, obstacles that once seemed impassable transform into stepping stones, and the act of doing itself builds a foundation for long-term growth. Your journey of transformation continues with the next important lesson: learning how to develop resilience by returning to these challenges repeatedly and seeing yourself grow with each encounter. The next chapter explores exactly how to build that durable inner strength. For more encouragement, ongoing dialogue, and real-world inspiration, make sure to subscribe to Mindset Liberation and join the conversation with your experiences and insights as you put your plan into courageous action. The cycle of moving through fear by acting rather than retreating is yours to own and to strengthen every single day. Chapter 4. Build resilience through repetition. True resilience does not blossom from one bold leap. It thrives in the steady practice of getting back up again and again when life is challenging. The secret strength of those who rise above anxiety, setbacks, or overwhelming doubt is not that they never face difficulty, but that they consistently expose themselves to uncomfortable experiences until those challenges lose their grip. The power behind repetition lies partly in the brain's remarkable capacity to adapt through what neuroscience calls habituation. As people practice the same behavior in the presence of difficulty, the brain's emotional response to stressors is gradually softened, reducing fear and uncertainty and replacing them with competence and calm. This principle finds strong support in both clinical research and story after story of transformation. In studies conducted by the American Psychological Association, individuals who were exposed repeatedly to tasks or environments that originally induced discomfort were more likely to report significant increases in well-being and confidence over time. The phenomenon is all around us, visible in athletes who become less anxious performing under pressure after years of training, musicians who see stage fright melt away after repeated concert halls, and individuals who once trembled in social situations, but, through constant exposure, could eventually enjoy the company of others. Psychologists identify this ability to build new emotional baselines as one of the defining features of emotional durability. Consider Arya, a university student who used to dread even the idea of participating in group discussions. Her heart would pound, and her mind would race with the fear of saying something wrong. Rather than relying on a single isolated burst of courage, she made the decision to participate in every discussion, regardless of the outcome. At first, her anxiety was as strong as ever, but after several weeks of returning, Arya's body and mind adapted. Responses from classmates grew more encouraging, her focus shifted from fear to curiosity, and the visceral panic faded into the background. It was not a magical transformation, but a slow building of strength that could only be earned through showing up, time after time, facing the same discomfort until it dulled to insignificance. This form of repeated engagement is not about punishing yourself or forcing strategies that don't fit your needs. It is about nurturing a healthy familiarity with what you fear so that your sense of control and mastery grows with every effort. The research echoes and multiplies these individual stories. Deliberate, structured exposure slowly builds a more resilient mind, making it easier to recover from setbacks and adapt to new situations. The brain's initial protest tapers as it learns that repeated effort does not result in catastrophe, but in gradual mastery. Each time you return to what once triggered anxiety or uncertainty, even when you still feel the flutter of nerves, you send a message to yourself that you are capable of facing life's complexity. The future is not shaped by isolated victories, but by gentle, persistent repetition, where every attempt plants the seeds of confidence and prepares you for even greater challenges ahead. Repetition as a method of building resilience is profoundly effective because it realigns both the body's habitual stress responses and the mind's perceptions of challenge. When discomfort or anxiety is repeatedly encountered in controlled, manageable doses, the fight-or-flight instinct, so often triggered by novelty and fear, gradually recedes. This change is not simply imagined, It is reflected in measurable neurological and psychological shifts. Researchers at Emory University have demonstrated that repeated exposure to feared situations alters the intensity of activation in the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, and increases connectivity between brain areas associated with coping and regulatory control. Essentially, what begins as an involuntary surge of anxiety can be subtled and eventually mastered through methodical return to the discomfort, reinforcing the belief that fear need not dictate action or worth. In everyday terms, repetition transforms the unfamiliar into the known. By continually engaging with situations that once triggered anxiety or avoidance, individuals prove to their nervous systems that the feared outcome is either unlikely or survivable. A well-documented example comes from Tony, a nurse haunted by panic during overnight shifts in a busy hospital ward. During her first months, Tony responded to every loud noise or unexpected event with apprehension and a racing pulse. Rather than shifting to a less demanding role, she committed to facing these shifts repeatedly, taking mindful note of her reactions but refusing to step away. Over the course of several months, the initial panic dulled into manageable concern, then faded into a confident routine. Support from colleagues and consistency in her schedule strengthened Tony's conviction that her feelings of fear did not predict disaster. Stress became an integrated part of her reality, not an enemy to be eliminated, but a signal she learned to work with, allowing her to focus on patient care instead of her own distress. The effectiveness of resilience building through repetition is fully supported by therapeutic principles such as exposure and response prevention, which is the backbone of many treatments for anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorder. It is the very act of returning, not necessarily succeeding at every step, that gradually builds endurance and capability. Scientific findings reveal that the brain's prefrontal cortex begins to assert itself, directing a more logical and less reactive response to perceived threats. As a result, individuals who commit to repeated encounters with their discomfort show not only decreased anxiety, but also increased motivation and an enhanced sense of self-mastery. The urgency of practicing this method lies in its remarkable long-term payoff. Without repetition, even the bravest single act can be erased by the resurgent pull of habit and avoidance. But with it, confidence is reinforced and emotional stamina flourishes, creating a well of resilience that can be called upon season after season. The transformation witnessed in stories like Tony's is not a matter of chance or isolated willpower, but the natural result of a system designed to adapt and overcome through practice. Repetition gives discomfort boundaries and eventually brings it under your influence. Mastery becomes inevitable for those who keep showing up. This lesson is vital for everyone seeking not just to survive adversity, but to thrive within its presence, crafting a steady core from which every future achievement becomes possible. Resilience is within your reach, and the act of building it starts with gentle repetition woven day after day into the fabric of your life. Begin by choosing one experience that regularly triggers discomfort or anxiety, a place, a task, a conversation, or any scenario you tend to dread or avoid. Write this down in a journal with absolute clarity. The next step is to plan your return. Set a specific, realistic goal that brings you face to face with this discomfort in a way that feels challenging but not overwhelming. Remember, repetition is about steady presence, not immediate bravery or dramatic results. Perhaps it's attending a weekly meeting and participating with even one comment, walking by a crowded street that makes you tense, or initiating a difficult conversation for just a few minutes. The power lies in the act of returning, not conquering it in a single afternoon. As you engage with the chosen discomfort, notice your body's responses, tightness, a rush of thoughts, or avoidance urges. If these reactions surface, greet them with curiosity and kindness. Practice deep and slow breathing, directing your attention outward to some concrete aspect of the environment. Maybe the color of an object, the feel of your shoes on the floor, or the rhythm of a nearby sound. Grounding yourself transforms every repeated exposure into a training session for self-control. After each encounter, take a moment to write about what happened, what got easier, what remained a challenge, how long your discomfort lasted, and most importantly, how you managed to get through it. These short reflections accumulate into undeniable proof that you are inching forward, no matter how modest the stride. Embed regularity into your repetitions. Frequency breeds familiarity, so schedule these exposures at regular, predictable times. Daily, weekly, whatever creates a rhythm your mind and body can anticipate and engage with. Create visual cues or reminders if you need to push yourself gently back into the situation. Some people place sticky notes in prominent places, set reminders on their phone, or enlist a friend as an accountability partner. The more you wrap repetition in intention and routine, the less space avoidance has to take hold. Every successful return, no matter how ordinary it might seem, is a small victory. Congratulate yourself aloud or share with someone you trust, actively collecting small successes. These wins form the bedrock of confidence, revealing in real time that discomfort can be endured and even diminished. Nurture a mindset that embraces gradual improvement, not overnight perfection. If you falter or skip a day, respond with compassion and realignment rather than harsh criticism. True resilience is the result of ongoing engagement, not flawless execution. Treat each repetition as an experiment and an act of self-respect, knowing that no single effort defines your capacity for growth. With patience, you will notice that returning to these situations results in less anxiety, quicker recovery, and a growing sense of empowerment. As your consistency generates resilience, you will naturally become more willing to face even larger challenges, motivated instead of inhibited by previous discomfort. Next, you will discover how to reinterpret and redefine failure itself as essential progress, rather than something to avoid. To keep this momentum alive, connect with Mindset Liberation for regular updates, inspiration, and a supportive community. Subscribe to stay encouraged, share your reflections, and add your own lessons to our collective journey. The practice of repetition is cumulative, so trust every small step and watch as your world steadily opens up before you. Chapter 5. Redefine failure as progress. What if the very moments you label as failures are actually your strongest opportunities for growth and transformation? The groundbreaking truth is that success does not flourish in a vacuum of perfection, but emerges from the rich, fertile ground of trial, error, and perseverance. Viewing failure as evidence of progress rather than proof of inadequacy is a mindset shift backed by science and lived by high performers across every field. It is not the setback itself that determines your fate, but how you choose to interpret and respond to it. Experts like Dr. Carol Dweck, a leading researcher in the psychology of motivation and author of Mindset, have shown that people with a growth mindset, those who see setbacks as a vital part of learning, develop more resilience, achieve greater success, and experience less emotional turmoil when things go wrong. In fact, her studies at Stanford University revealed that students who reframe mistakes as information and effort as a path to mastery were more likely to thrive through adversity and continue improving, while those who feared failure stagnated or retreated. Across society, you can observe countless scenarios where individuals are paralyzed by the dread of falling short. Employees hesitate to take on unfamiliar roles. Artists abandon half-finished projects for fear of critique. Young adults choose predictable paths instead of daring opportunities, haunted by the possibility of mistakes. This is not merely personal reluctance, it is shaped by cultural norms that trumpet achievement while stigmatizing error. From schools that worship grades over curiosity to workplaces that reward flawless results rather than honest effort, people absorb the false lesson that mistakes equal shame and that falling down erases your potential. Yet storytelling and research consistently uncover the opposite. Those who rise and innovate are those who step boldly, stumble publicly, and then use their experiences as building blocks for greater knowledge and skill. Take, for example, Serena, a recent business graduate who, after launching her first startup, watched it collapse within its first year. Publicly, the venture could be written off as a failure, but by choosing to view her challenges as an advanced education, Serena gathered priceless lessons on negotiation, team building, and resilience. Other entrepreneurs and high achievers often recount similar turning points: revision after disappointment, adjusting after error, and ultimately, the ability to stand stronger and move forward with greater clarity because of what their setbacks illuminated. You have more power than you know to transform your relationship with failure, to see it not as the end of something, but as a critical checkpoint on the journey toward your capabilities. When mistakes and setbacks become data points instead of damning verdicts, a sense of hope and possibility infuses every endeavor. Research from the Harvard Business Review indicates that organizations fostering a fail-forward mentality experience more creativity, employee engagement, and breakthroughs across teams, making it clear that progress and failure are forever intertwined. This is the mindset you can claim for yourself. Evidence that the twists, bumps, and rough terrain of your journey provide the raw material for your greatest personal growth. The effectiveness of redefining failure as progress lies in how it fundamentally changes the architecture of belief and behavior. When you consciously choose to see mistakes and setbacks as critical feedback instead of evidence of your inability, you break a centuries-old bond between fear and limitation. Neuroscience tells us that the brain grows through error and adaptation. Functional MRI studies have demonstrated that when people adopt a growth mindset, their brains display heightened activity after making a mistake. This isn't just a fleeting blip of neurochemistry. It signals that the mind is actively searching for new strategies, building new neural pathways, and sharpening problem-solving skills. Carol Dweck's extensive research repeatedly found that praise for effort, struggle, and curiosity, instead of for flawless outcomes, reconfigures a person's internal reward system. Learning itself becomes deeply satisfying, and persistence in the face of challenge becomes hardwired. Research from the University of Chicago looked at aspiring musicians, tracking thousands of hours spent in both practice and failed performances. It was not those blessed with the least mistakes who reached exceptional levels, but those who practiced consistently, responded to setbacks with analytical curiosity, and adjusted quickly each time they came up short. Mistakes, it turns out, were not detours, but guideposts pointing towards skills they had yet to master. Over years, these learning-rich failures fueled growth, and the musicians emerged with grit and independence, capabilities that separated them from their peers. A compelling real-life example comes from Thomas, a mid-career professional blindsided by losing his dream job. The shame and disappointment at first seemed insurmountable, evidence of personal deficiency. With reluctant encouragement, Thomas started journaling about his journey, capturing not only what went wrong, but also what he was learning in each phase of his job search. By viewing each rejection not as a closed door, but as fresh data, he refined his interview approaches, expanded his skill set, and learned to anticipate hard questions with calm instead of dread. Over several months, he developed a repertoire of techniques and practical wisdom impossible to acquire without facing adversity. Ultimately, Thomas landed a more fulfilling role and, more importantly, discovered a deep reservoir of adaptability and optimism within himself. The truth made clear by psychological science and human experience alike is that failure only cements defeatism if left unexamined or met with shame. But by treating failure as an essential teaching tool, gradually training yourself to extract value from each disappointment, new neural and emotional patterns take root. The process fosters internal resilience and external creativity. Over time, this orientation to failure inoculates you against paralyzing perfectionism, allowing for ambitious choices and spirited risk-taking. The urgency of developing this mindset cannot be overstated, especially in a world that changes rapidly and offers little certainty. The ability to mine every failure, a failed test, a lost client, a broken promise, for actionable information means setbacks will never shrink your horizon, but will steadily strengthen your resolve. What once seemed an endpoint becomes instead a vital catalyst for enduring progress. To transform the way you experience setbacks, start with a conscious pause the next time you face what feels like a failure. Instead of reacting with self-criticism or avoidance, acknowledge your instinctive thoughts and then intentionally shift your focus to curiosity. Ask yourself, what valuable information is hidden within this experience? And jot down your observations, no matter how small or unclear they first seem. With this act, you're training your mind to interrupt the old pathway of shame and instead follow a route toward discovery and growth. Now frame each setback as data, not as a verdict about your ability or worth. Commit to a practice of journaling where you record one learning point for every mistake or disappointment that comes your way. Over time, you'll notice this shift become more natural and immediate as the habit of looking for lessons settles into your daily thinking. Create a failure log dedicated to every stumble, false start, or rejection you encounter, listing next to each event what that failure teaches or allows you to refine. Aim for small wins. When you make a mistake in a meeting, look for an element you can do better next time, or for a supportive detail from someone else's feedback. When a risk doesn't pay off, rather than labeling it a loss, treat it as a rehearsal for something bigger in your journey. Practice sharing one lesson with a trusted friend, mentor, or community group, not only to normalize setbacks, but to receive others' stories and realize you are not alone. These regular exercises cement the understanding that failure is a shared and expected step on the road to growth, not a private or permanent flaw. At work or in your personal goals, begin to reward effort and innovation, even if outcomes fall short of your original aims. Congratulate yourself for reaching out to someone new, for pitching an idea, or for taking the first uncertain step. Each time you do this, you're widening the boundaries of what's possible in your life. Whenever doubt creeps in, recall past failures you've successfully moved through. Relive not the sting itself, but the practical adjustment and learning you gained from that chapter. Let these memories become the foundation of growing self-respect and resilience. Keep this process gentle. Progress is cumulative, not instantaneous. If you find yourself feeling especially discouraged by a setback, return to your notes and evidence of earlier lessons learned. Consider adopting a mantra for difficult moments, such as, "Every mistake is my teacher," and repeat it when new challenges arise. This language gradually changes your internal dialogue and rewires expectations from dread to possibility. By embracing this system, you make it possible to welcome new opportunities without the constant fear of making a mistake. Over time, this new habit leads to bolder choices, steady forward movement, and deeper satisfaction from every unique twist in your path. Let yourself be inspired by each lesson, however disguised, and use it as momentum for what comes next. In the next chapter, you will move from internal change to the external world, learning to recognize and challenge the limits you believe are imposed by circumstance in order to break through barriers you didn't realize could shift. For ongoing inspiration, daily encouragement, and the connecting power of shared experience, join Mindset Liberation by subscribing, sharing your own journeys, and helping each other turn failure into the ultimate tool for personal growth. The life you want is carved from what you do after each fall, so keep leaning in, logging your wins, and setting your sights on ever greater horizons. Chapter 6. Stretch beyond external limits. Limits that seem to surround and define your reality are often less permanent than they appear. Many of the boundaries that bind you, whether they are related to career, relationships, opportunities, or self-expression, were set as much by other people's beliefs and circumstances as by your own abilities. The breakthrough begins when you decide to challenge these external limits, stepping beyond the invisible lines so many quietly accept as immovable. It is an act of self-liberation, one that has sparked some of the most inspiring examples of change and growth across history. This solution begins to unfold when you question what is and replace it with what if. Understanding how pervasive external constraints are can be both eye-opening and empowering. According to a study published in the Harvard Business Review, nearly 80% of workers cite organizational or societal expectations, not personal skill, as the primary reason they do not pursue new roles or projects. It is startling to realize that so much of what is considered impossible or inaccessible starts not from concrete obstacles, but from a kind of social conditioning that discourages risk and curiosity. Cultural narratives, family expectations, educational systems, and workplace hierarchies provide messages about what can and cannot be achieved, often drawing lines between what is permitted and what is off limits. Yet experts in positive psychology, such as Dr. Martin Seligman, have demonstrated that learned helplessness, the habit of accepting limits imposed by others, can be reversed through deliberate effort, self-advocacy, and mindset shifts. It is this reversal that ignites a sustainable sense of hope and agency. Real-life transformations start when people notice the boundaries, then find the courage to test them. Consider Leah, who worked for years in a rigid corporate environment where she was labeled as the detail person and thus overlooked for leadership roles. For a long time, Leah internalized these limits, quietly curbing her ambitions for advancement. That changed when she decided, almost experimentally, to join a cross-departmental project, publicly volunteering for key components and putting her strategic thinking into the spotlight. While her comfort zone was stretched at every turn, Leah's initiative drew the respect of colleagues and management, opening doors that organizational norms once kept tightly shut. The change did not happen instantly or without discomfort, but it was only possible because she questioned an external limitation and tested its validity with direct action. Research confirms the pattern. Those who move beyond externally imposed boundaries report increased satisfaction, stronger sense of purpose, and radical improvements in confidence. According to data from the World Economic Forum, individuals and teams who are encouraged to innovate rather than conform outpace their peers in adaptation, performance, and fulfillment. When you reframe inherited boundaries as tests instead of walls, you claim the right to shape your own future. This chapter is your guide to actively interrogating those lines, discerning which limits are authentic updates for your growth and which exist only by tradition, habit, or the worries of others. Stretching beyond external limits is a promise you make to yourself each time you say, "There is more possible for me than I once believed." In that promise, you will discover the real power to transform your life. When you actively challenge and stretch beyond external limits, you not only disrupt the inertia of long-standing boundaries, but engage your mind's remarkable capacity for adaptation and growth. The compelling power of this approach comes from both psychological principles and decades of observable transformation in individuals from all walks of life. According to studies published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, people who are encouraged to question external assumptions and to pursue opportunities despite their initial doubts experience significant gains in autonomy, motivation, and long-term satisfaction. By refusing to accept barriers as fixed truths, you signal to your brain that limitation does not equal permanence, which fundamentally reshapes your expectations of possibility. This resistance to imposed restriction fires up creative problem-solving areas in the prefrontal cortex, unlocking strategies that remain dormant when compliance or resignation is the default response. The effectiveness of this method is also visible in stories that unfold on both grand stages and personal battlegrounds. One such story is Eduardo's, a second-generation immigrant working as a line manager at a large logistics company. Raised in a family and community that valued steady, uncontroversial employment, he internalized both cultural and organizational beliefs that advancement was reserved for a select few. Despite his drive and abilities, Eduardo watched others move ahead while he quietly accepted the roles assigned to him. It wasn't until a visiting consultant ran a leadership seminar and encouraged participants to question inherited company traditions that Eduardo hesitantly stepped forward with a process improvement proposal. Expecting resistance and struggling with imposter syndrome, he still delivered his recommendations to upper management. The process was nerve-wracking, not least because the old rules felt immutable, but the reaction was transformative. His ideas were not only welcomed but implemented, and Eduardo was soon leading pilot projects that drew on his previously hidden potential. By pushing back against those inherited limits, Eduardo not only altered his professional path, but also shifted the collective mindset of his team, demonstrating that what is possible always expands when someone is brave enough to ask, "Why not me?" Scientific exploration supports the urgency of questioning external constraints. Organizational psychologists report that environments which encourage employees to challenge processes, ask critical questions, and propose alternative pathways see reduced rates of disengagement and burnout. According to Dr. Amy Edmondson of Harvard Business School, Psychological safety, the freedom to voice dissent and experiment without punishment, predicts both individual well-being and team innovation. Her findings make it clear that those who take even small steps to stretch their context can dramatically influence what is achievable for themselves and those around them. The inherited and socially enforced boundaries that shape your world can be redrawn, but only if you risk daring to stand at their edge. If left unchallenged, external limits calcify into personal truths, quietly dictating who you are and what you can reach. Meeting them, testing their solidity, and searching for overlooked alternatives are critical steps in reclaiming control over your own trajectory. There is seriousness in the challenge. Family, culture, and convention can be powerful, but the alternative is a life ruled by inevitability rather than intention. The urge to fit in or not disrupt the status quo is strong, but the evidence and the experience of those who have journeyed beyond their starting point is clear. Possibility expands in direct proportion to your willingness to test, push, and reimagine the lines drawn by others. Choosing to confront those external limits is not just powerful, it is essential for growth in a world that is only as narrow or wide as you dare to imagine. Challenging external limits and stepping into new territory is a practical journey that begins with mindful awareness and bold experimentation. Start by choosing one area of your life where you sense a boundary, whether expressed by workplace tradition, family expectations, community norms, or even a role you feel stuck within. Pause to ask yourself whose rule or belief you are accepting as immovable, and whether it truly reflects your deepest potential. Write down this limit with as much detail as you can. Next, map out at least one small but concrete action that pushes the edge of this boundary. This could be volunteering for a project you've never done, expressing a creative idea that challenges groupthink, or voicing a request or opinion long held back. The intention isn't to upend your life in one grand gesture, but by taking a first step that tests whether the imagined barrier is as solid as you believe. If you find resistance, either internal or external, remind yourself this is not a sign to retreat, but evidence that change is underway. Practice reframing resistance as curiosity. When someone raises objections to your initiative, listen and gather the information, but return to your center. What excites or energizes you about pushing this boundary? This simple technique of curiosity arms you with adaptability rather than frustration or defensiveness. Set yourself up for frequent micro wins by celebrating every forward movement, no matter how modest. Maybe your first idea is not adopted immediately, but the simple act of sharing your voice strengthens your resolve. Each small success becomes evidence that external expectations can be negotiated, adjusted, and often surmounted. Refresh your process daily or weekly, reflecting in a journal or personal log what you tried, how others responded, and most importantly, what changed within you as a result. Over time, you'll likely notice shifts in your own assertiveness and growing comfort stretching the boundaries even further. Gather feedback from supportive allies, mentors, colleagues, friends who applaud your willingness to try new things, and use those reflections as fuel. If bureaucratic processes or deep-seated social ideals make real or permanent change slow, focus on the internal victories, the confidence it requires to challenge, the learning that results from pushback, and the exposure to new networks and opportunities. Adopt a mindset that external limits are rarely absolute and nearly always subject to revision or even quiet revolution through persistence and creative strategy. Remember, history is made by individuals who saw beyond immediate boundaries, however modest their first actions. If setbacks occur, welcome them as clarifying signals rather than concluding failures. Acknowledge every attempt and notice how new possibilities tend to open up, most for those who insist on asking questions when "that's just how we do it" rings out. With each repetition, you'll gain strength for bigger, more public boundary pushing and inspire others to follow suit. Your developing skill in stretching beyond what others prescribe is the foundation for thriving even in places of profound uncertainty or tension. As you become familiar with challenging the visible limits, you prepare yourself for the subtle, wilder landscape of adapting and finding vitality even in discomfort. The next chapter will show you how to thrive in unfamiliar zones and cultivate lasting growth from every risk you take. If you're drawing hope or ideas from this book, keep your energy up by subscribing to Mindset Liberation, engaging with our community, and sharing what limits you're currently confronting. By doing so, you not only expand your own world, but contribute strength to others stretching beside you. This is more than boundary testing. It's the real act of making your future boundless, one stride beyond the expected at a time. Chapter 7. Thrive in the Uncomfortable Zone. The breakthrough moments that define your growth are almost never found in the spaces where you feel totally at ease. They emerge in those strange, challenging, unpredictable zones where comfort dissolves and your real potential awakens. Thriving in the uncomfortable zone is not about merely tolerating adversity or enduring hardship until it passes. It is about cultivating an active, appreciative relationship with uncertainty and stress, knowing that these are the fertile soils where transformation and lasting confidence take root. This essential solution is more than a mindset. It's a collection of skills and attitudes shaped by deliberate choices that turn discomfort into a familiar companion and even, in time, a source of motivation and creativity. The origins of this approach are rooted in observations across psychology, business, sport, and creative fields. Across industries, studies show that those who choose to operate at the edge of their abilities, their so-called growth edge, demonstrate faster adaptation, higher innovation, and improved emotional resilience. Researchers at Yale University observed that individuals who consistently seek out manageable discomfort, not overwhelming stress, but stretches just beyond the familiar, score higher on measures of life satisfaction, well-being, and even productivity. Their work mirrors classic findings like those from Dr. Andrew Huberman at Stanford, whose neuroscience-backed approach confirms that intentional engagement with challenge activates the brain's learning and growth circuits, encouraging long-term psychological strength and adaptability. Real-life scenarios reflect this truth repeatedly. Consider professional athletes who deliberately train under pressure conditions, or artists who take on mediums and audiences outside their comfort range. These choices, often framed as deliberate practice, push the boundaries of personal capacity and have been shown to generate the kind of sustained excellence that can't be achieved by relying solely on existing strengths. Take the story of Raquel, a project manager who, haunted by perfectionism and paralyzed by self-doubt, made a decision to accept roles and projects where she did not have all the answers. Though initially rattled by frequent uncertainty and setbacks, she soon found herself developing new creative skills, adaptive leadership, and most crucially, a deep trust in her own ability to figure things out on the fly. Over time, discomfort stopped being her adversary and became her ticket to a broader world. The ability to not just withstand, but to thrive in the storm of the unfamiliar is a powerful driver of personal and professional fulfillment. Positive psychology calls this stretch thriving, a state characterized by optimism, engagement, and productive tenacity even at the outer limits of one's skill. Reports from the World Economic Forum note that the employers with the most adaptable, satisfied teams infuse their culture with opportunities for challenge and active experimentation, encouraging all members to fail, try again, and grow stronger in the process. The crucial lesson is that thriving in discomfort is not reserved for the extraordinary. It is a natural capacity you can cultivate. When you actively position yourself in situations that are uncertain, a little unpredictable, and just shy of your current skills, you open up new dimensions of possibility. Every moment spent stretching in the uncomfortable zone is a moment invested in your courage, competence, and clarity. You hold the power to transform life's turbulence into the raw material for genuine, ongoing transformation. Thriving in the uncomfortable zone is a method grounded in compelling scientific evidence, rigorous psychological theory, and the lived experience of individuals who have discovered that their greatest capacities are awakened when they embrace challenge rather than evade it. At the core of this approach lies the understanding that psychological growth occurs most robustly at the edge of your competence, the point where skills, knowledge, and emotional resources are stretched by new demands. Decades of research in neuroscience and behavioral psychology reinforce the importance of optimal anxiety, a concept sometimes referred to as the Yerkes-Dodson law. This principle demonstrates that moderate, sustained discomfort activates the brain's alertness and learning mechanisms, enhancing focus, memory retention, and even creativity, while chronic ease or unrelenting stress blunt those functions. By intentionally seeking out and remaining within a zone that feels slightly uncomfortable but manageable, you engage the full machinery of adaptation, resilience, and personal evolution. This notion echoes across transformational narratives. Consider the story of Ben, an IT consultant whose entire career was shaped by self-protection and a desire to perfect every task before presenting his work to peers. For years, his expertise plateaued. He felt competent but uninspired, and the constant maintenance of his comfort zone led to mounting stagnation and fear of failing. When a reorganization at his company forced him into a mentorship role, Ben found himself with no roadmap and surrounded by complex, unpredictable challenges. Initially, he experienced significant anxiety, self-doubt, and even physical tension. Yet, compelled by necessity, he began to approach discomfort as an unavoidable ingredient to progress. He started reading outside his field, actively sought feedback, and allowed himself to perform, with all his imperfections, in front of others. In a matter of months, not only did his technical and interpersonal skills multiply, but he also discovered a new, more energizing relationship with challenge. The things that once set his nerves on edge now became signs he was about to level up. Neuroscientific findings strongly support the enduring change people like Ben experience. Studies from the University of California have shown that when participants expose themselves to novel or difficult situations deliberately and repeatedly, their brains create stronger, denser neural networks. This enhances not just knowledge or ability in a particular area, but also the capacity to bounce back from setbacks, handle future uncertainty, and feel an increased sense of purpose. This neuroplasticity, as it's called, ensures that human beings are not captive to their current limitations. Instead, it reveals that we are built to grow, to develop better skills and deeper resilience when we abandon the pursuit of perpetual comfort for targeted, meaningful discomfort. The intensity and seriousness of this solution cannot be overstated. Cultures and individuals that encourage regular, strategic discomfort are far better prepared to tackle unexpected crises and seize emerging opportunities. Businesses that reward innovation, students who seek out difficult courses, and individuals who make a habit of volunteering for unfamiliar roles consistently outperform their peers in adaptability and satisfaction. Thriving in discomfort becomes a self-reinforcing loop. The more you stretch, the greater your appetite for further challenge, and the stronger your sense of control and fulfillment. The urgent lesson is this: by choosing to live and grow at the edge of comfort, you are not just reacting to crisis. You are building a steady core capable of weathering life's storms and harvesting their lessons for ongoing growth. Stepping into the uncomfortable zone begins with a conscious choice to challenge what feels routine and safe in your daily life. The first step is to honestly assess your current routines, relationships, and even your personal projects, to spot patterns of comfort and predictability. Ask yourself, where do I consistently take the easy route? What situations or tasks have I been avoiding because they bring tension or self-doubt? Write down one or two of your most consistent comfort zones, no matter how modest they may seem. Once you have identified these areas, select a manageable and realistic discomfort to invite into your week. This might be volunteering to share your ideas in a meeting, asking a clarifying question even if you fear it might sound naive, or signing up for an activity where you feel unskilled or out of place. The key is not to overwhelm yourself, but to choose edges that are safe but meaningfully stretching. As you enter this unfamiliar territory, set a clear intention for your experiment. Before acting, take a few minutes to imagine the potential gains from stepping into this challenge, not just for your skill set, but also for your future confidence. Whenever nerves arise, remind yourself that this is evidence of real growth occurring, not something to be avoided, but celebrated. Embrace the mindset that discomfort is merely a signal that you're tapping into uncharted capacities. Throughout the process, practice mindful awareness by noticing your body's signals and naming your feelings as they arise. I am nervous or I feel uncertain, without judgment. This small pause turns emotional static into a navigable signal rather than background noise. To build momentum, break down major discomforts into bite-sized trials. Instead of aiming to complete a full presentation, maybe start by speaking up with a single comment in a meeting. If learning a new skill feels daunting, dedicate just 10 or 15 minutes a day to practice and acknowledge every unfamiliar attempt. These small wins deserve real recognition, so take time to celebrate completion, no matter the immediate result. Track your progress in a journal, noting each uncomfortable moment and the results, however minor. Over time, this running log becomes compelling proof that resilience and capacity accumulate from precisely these repeated forays into vulnerability. Seek support from allies or mentors who appreciate growth rather than perfection. Consider forming a small challenge group, whether in person or online, where everyone reports on their weekly stretch experiences and cheers one another on. The power of community boosts your resolve and normalizes the awkward, shaky feelings that arise when expanding into new territory. Use setbacks as stepping stones, treating any disappointing outcome as information for your next bold move, rather than proof of limitation. Moving consistently toward your uncomfortable edge turns experimentation into a sustainable habit. As you continue, you will notice that not only does discomfort wane, but your self-concept evolves, growing bigger, braver, and far more flexible than you thought possible. Each risky step makes taking the next one that much easier, and soon you will find yourself thriving not in spite of adversity, but precisely because you have trained yourself to greet it as opportunity. Trust every nudge beyond comfort. These actions shape you into someone capable of both enduring and flourishing in a world that rewards resilience over mere familiarity. You have now reached the end of a transformative journey, one that began by daring to question the comfort zones that keep you small and led you step by step through crafted strategies for genuine growth. Throughout these chapters, you explored the origins of mental discomfort and learned to challenge safe patterns, confront your fears with bold action, and build resilience through the power of repetition. You discovered how to reinterpret failure as essential progress, push beyond the external limits imposed by others, and most courageously, how to truly thrive in those uncomfortable places where the greatest change takes place. Each lesson has shown that discomfort is not an enemy, but a signal that you are on the frontier of your own expansion. Remember, growth requires not just knowledge, but practice, and your willingness to stretch is itself a marker of strength and hope. Thank you for dedicating your attention, energy, and trust to this book, and for walking alongside Mindset Liberation on your journey to self-mastery. For more inspiration, practical tools, and a supportive community, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would love to hear how your story of growth and transformation unfolds next.